I've got a instant something or other coffee Keurig thing, and I use the basket. The coffee's better, but it has fines in the bottom. If you get them stirred up enough, they actually are good. But if you get it at the bottom, it's like, I don't know, it's something dry and nasty in your mouth. It doesn't taste bad, it just feels bad. What did I do today? Well, one of the things that brought me on here was we were playing with a B8200 Kubota that's probably in the neighborhood of... The 8200 came out just as I originally got out of Kubota in 83, I do believe. Could be wrong, 82, 83, somewhere in there. The 200, I guess you call them the 200 series, 5200, 6200, 7200, 8200. And I didn't realize at the time there's a 9200 as well that you can find on tractordata.com. Well, my buddy ended up with a used version of this one, and it's hurt. It needs glow plugs and injectors cleaned, etc., etc. But once it's running, it runs great. Typical power cell or pre-combustion chamber engine. This 3-point hitch crapped out, just stopped, and he thought it was from abuse. Well, we started reading through, and Kubota has some oddball stuff on there that we could literally take off the system. It doesn't need to be there now. It's a power beyond connection that takes power from the pump, runs it through a block. You turn this little valve and it runs it out the side to steering or blade in the front or something else to run on its own valve, of course, and the steering motor having its own relief, and then run it in a power beyond loop all the way back through into the hydraulic system. So it's kind of a funny thing. And we thought that might be the problem. Well, I went to turn the valve and it just about deadheaded the pump. It's like, nope, we found it. That's fine. So we ended up playing around in the back. We didn't even check pressures because we knew it had enough. It popped a relief for the blade. And that wasn't the problem. So we went down looking into things, and he says, what's this knob over here? I said, that's to change your lowering rate. If you have something heavy on the 3-point, you can turn that in there so that they don't arms don't crash down when you try to lower them. Or jerk the machine as you're putting it down step by step. And he says, well, that's stuck. Could it be that? I said, if you haven't adjusted it and everything, he says, no, it's stuck. I've never touched it. I said, well, it's not that. So there's only a couple of things left, and one of them is to find the safety valve, and the other one is the control valve itself, which on that thing is mondo. It's like 2 5-inch by 2.5 boxes on each end, and a casting in between that bolts with 3 bolts up against the the rock shaft housing with a piston in it. And but what they did with this is the final pipe coming back from the funky power beyond valve in the middle. The final pipe coming back comes up to a banjo fitting to run the blade. It must be an aftermarket blade or something, which is still stupid because of the midway valve was designed for a blade in the power beyond system. And it comes back to the banjo fitting. Take the bolt out, toss it in the bucket, and they have a long bolt. You put a sleeve up against the valve casting. You put the original hydraulic pipe here. You put another sleeve here, and you run their banjo bolt all the way through it. Is it another sleeve? No, it's not another sleeve. There's a sleeve here, the original banjo sleeve here, and then the long bolt goes through it, and it's divided. It has ports here for this sleeve and ports here for the pump. And then there's a fitting out the end. Pump comes up through the holes, goes out through the fitting, up to the blade, turns around at the blade, comes all the way back to this other sleeve in here because it's divided, and then goes into the 3-point hitch, meaning the priority is the front blade. Now to operate as a power beyond system, there's a third hose that they could have plumbed all of this into that mid block, power beyond block, but they didn't. The third hose goes in and they put an adapter at the fill port, and that's where the return is from the blade. The return from what? Well, if it's just sitting there it goes through the power beyond circuit. In other words, from the pump all the way to the back. In the back, crossed over, goes up into the valve, blade valve, quite a travel, turns around and comes back to the power beyond to go into the 3-point hitch. Pump to fitting, fitting to fitting, to blade valve, turn around and come back so that it would be able to lift the 3-point. Now in between, if you pull the lever, it has a separate return that doesn't go in to the 3-point hitch. It shuts it off. It doesn't get any feed now. The return from that goes through the separate hose into the fill port. The power beyond valve in the middle, the original one that's designed to turn a little doodad and run 2 hoses out to a blade or a loader, even power steering, that has a power beyond return built in it. But somebody designed this other system. Whatever. So we got working with that, and I showed him how that worked. I picked the blade up, and the return from the blade didn't go power beyond because it'll blow the seals out of the valve. The return went through the fill port, the extended fill port, right? The fitting right in the side of it. Big old. Well, he started getting an understanding of that, and he's like, "Oh no, it's yeah, you're gonna have to pull this back end apart." Like, oh crap. Tried testing with air, but we couldn't get enough air pressure to do it. Apparently the seal in the piston is still pretty strong, and it sticks in there. So it needs some good pressure to move it, which is a good sign. And he pulled the valve body off, and we found a bad O-ring, so we put another generic O-ring in there, set of them, put it back up on there, nothing. But it didn't leak either, so the O-rings worked. Just a common thing to remember. You pull a block off one of these things, and there's 2 ports. And one's going to be oil in, and the other's going to be for oil out. So what we had here was one O-ring had collapsed. Now the O-rings I put in it from the kit were a little too large. Just a scratch. Metric hole, American size, pushed it in there. The next size down didn't quite meet the outside, but it was so close that a little grease would have held it there. And they would have been fine, believe it or not. But the problem there is, since it doesn't touch the outside, when you close it down, it might actually expand it enough to touch the outside edge of the hole there, the port, the groove that it sets in. Well, because it's a counterbore and not a groove, the O-ring can do one of these and wear itself out in time. But it would work if that's all you had. I put in one that was slightly larger than the original. The original fit snug, and this one fit in there a little tighter, but both of them went on, collapsed, and because it's not in a groove, it's in a counterbore, open center, then when the O-ring goes in and smooshes, it has space to go. The problem with a groove is 2 things. One of them is if it's way too large and you forced it in there, and you tighten it up against the side, that O-ring's oversized, which means you pushed it in a hole, the diameter increased. So the groove is full. You tighten it up, and if there's too much oil or grease or anything in there with it, it'll never meet all the way down, one. And the other one is, if it does meet all the way down because you forced it, it's in the groove, it can actually break the edges of the groove out, either the outside edge, or in this case it would have been the inside edge if I had one, would have pushed it in and possibly cracked it. Now you got a new problem. You have a new path for oil to go. Just a warning to you. Now some of you say, well, we do this, and it works just fine, and it didn't meet all the way. Whatever you want to do, knock yourself out. I'm just warning you. If you're going to put in the wrong size O-ring that can do the job, don't do it in a groove. It's captured inside and outside diameter. It will be a problem. Just a warning. So with this one, with the counterbore, we were able to do it, put it on there, try it, test it, and nothing happened. So we knew what we had to do at that point. Take it back off, put it in this box, and take it home and disassemble it. The other one is that one of my pet peeves is know the system, the 7 steps of troubleshooting. Know the system, understand the customer's complaint or the operator's complaint, because you hear the customer complain on the phone, is that the operator? If it isn't, step 1 is getting the operator's complaint, the actual real complaint. So you have to know what you're talking about in the first place before the complaint means anything. And then there's step 2, of course, go out and confirm the complaint with the operator, showing you what's going on. Step 3 is you working the complaint and trying to come to certain conclusions before you get into making a list of the conclusions that you just came to, testing them and adjusting it. Number 6, whittling it down to whatever you're doing, whatever decision you make. For number 6 is your testing, adjusting, and repair. And number 7 is confirming it. And in some cases, educating the operator, the owner, whatever. And if that concludes it, you've confirmed it, then you move on, you're done. If it doesn't confirm it, then do you have step 8 that's left? Go back to step 3 and start over again. Just before your list, operate it again, and then whittle your list back down to what you think it is this time. And why do we have that? And you say, well, that's failed. You made a mistake the first time. No, not really. You don't know that. And so what do you mean? In too many cases, you're 50-50 shot whether you get it right the first time. Troubleshooting helps whittle it down so you do find a problem. You do fix the problem, but it might not be the whole problem. I ran into an excavator one time that had 4 stuck valves in its body. 2 of them controlled how the main pumps, 2 of them, merged and divided with each other. One of them was the control spool, and the other one was the actual merge-divide spool. And the other 2 were functions that I saw had a problem in the arm and the bucket cylinder sticking. I had to pull them all out, clean the whole body up, clean the body out, and then start all over again. I made my employer angry because when I pulled that entire massive valve out of there and took a day to do it, took a day and a half to get it back in there and up and running. And they just said, just do it in a machine. It's like, well, no, you couldn't. Especially if you have to hammer drive the valves out, you have to contaminate the valve to fix it, which means you can send stuff through the system and make the situation worse. But in the Anderson equipment world, proper troubleshooting didn't exist, nor did proper cleanup procedures. So those are some of the things why you go through those steps that I found 4 valves by watching the system and operating it, finding a problem immediately, going out and testing the cure of that problem, confirm it. And it was, the first one was tighten up a belt to the alternator. One problem immediately disappeared, but it didn't fix the rest of them. And that's why I say go through your 7 steps, and step number 8 is, did it fix the initial problem or all of the problems? Well, then you go back up and start the troubleshooting over again. From confirming, now you have a new complaint. Well, I'll go up there. Sometimes with a new complaint, you have to start all over again. But it's you're working the system. You have number 3 where you've operated it and probably came to those conclusions. This might not be the only problem. I missed that years ago on one of them that I was thinking about the problem, and we had a transmission failure, actually a power director failure in a 7030 Alice, I think it was. It was one of those 7,000 big boys. And he says, you know what the water got in the system? I said, no, I just pulled it out of there to try and get parts coming. I got to find out what the problem is now. I haven't had a chance to look at it. And he says, well, do you think it could have been the cooler in the bottom of the radiator? I said, yeah, that's the next thing to test. Why? Well, I hadn't done it first. That's what made him mad. So we had to start that all over again. Don't you think you should have checked that in the first place? And I said, no, because I needed to drain the oil and find out what was destroyed in the power director to get the parts coming, and then troubleshoot it to figure out that it was a radiator problem. Because you guys demanded that I pull this out first, didn't you? Sometimes following instructions is the problem. The 7 steps of troubleshooting and all of this led us down to where we were. We got to know the system. We studied it. We looked it over. And I had an idea of that little power beyond valve in the middle. So when we went through those procedures, we were able to come to the conclusion of where the problem is, not exactly, which is backwards from what I usually run into. This time we know where the problem is, not so much what the problem is. And then we think what it is a stuck unloading valve or diverter valve that might be in there. One where it's a unloading spool of sorts, where you're controlling a spool valve with a lever, and it operates another spool, and what it does is it slows down the operation of the system so that you move the lever and it breaks to start moving the unloader, and the unloader valve is being hydraulic, moves smoother and takes the jerkiness out of the system. It operates a lot more intelligently, a lot, how can you say it? It doesn't jerk your equipment. Best way to put it. So anyway, that's what I wanted to leave you with tonight. Just be careful with a lot of stuff. But in this one, I'm going to have to fix the battery wires. I'm going to have to do something with the battery and the glow plugs and the alternator that isn't charging either. After a while, all this stuff starts to compound into problems that you start cranking, you take your starter out. Your starter's expensive. Why is the starter going up? Because you have bad connections on the battery. Why? What problem is that causing? Well, and this problem is actually coming from cranking too often, from not having a fully charged battery all the time, wearing the starter down, and your glow plugs aren't working right because you have bad connections on the battery, voltage drop. There are a myriad of other things to go with it, but we were there for the hydraulics, so that's what I concentrated on. The rest of it he can fix himself without much trouble. But I'm going to have to help him, I think, with the battery terminals. We're at that point. But anyway, I figured I'd leave that with you tonight. That's what we did in the field, and that was one of the ways that you take your troubleshooting steps. And the first one, more important than any of it, before we even worked on it, was I even popped up the computer that I had with the service manual on there from Kubota and had him read to see what in the world we were working with. Then he got excited and came to a conclusion and was no longer... Two things come with it. One of them is you have an idea of what's in your system and what the failure might be. And the other one is you have the confidence that you have the information to study and read later, so that if you do tear it apart, you have a foundation to go from, to work by. You're not just flying blind when you tear it apart. So always, always, always. In some cases, somebody's tearing an 8N Ford apart, a Jubilee or anything like that, an old Ferguson or some of these. The Ferguson's all the way up to the 1085 have the Scotch yoke pump in the belly, but they also have one or two piggyback pumps in there as well. That starts to get confusing. So, and some of them have it up in, no, they have them all back there, even the earlier ones, 165s, and I think down to the 135 maybe, if they have multi-trouble in them. So it's important to know what you're working with. It's also important to know when you step on that clutch. If you go all the way down, it shuts off that multi-trouble pump and you're starting up and low, which is part of their design. Just like the Oliver and White hydraul shift and the over-under hydraul shift. They actually start in low with a Sprag clutch, and as the pump comes on, it goes ahead. On the Ferguson, you don't have to. You can step halfway down on your dual-stage clutch, stop the transmission, and your pump's still going. So you are still in high on your multi-trouble. They just didn't build it tough enough in the first place. But I worked on a few in the past, and worked on a couple of them where we took the multi-trouble out and put a shaft in there, direct. People loved the multi-trouble, but it just wasn't tough enough. And most of it wasn't proper maintenance. There's no filter in the system, so you needed to change your oil regularly, at least once a year. And the systems lasted quite a bit longer, even the multi-trouble. So that's one of the reasons to study and know your system and how it operates before you even begin to work at it. Your employer is never going to be happy with it. Just accept it. Well, I do what they say so I can keep my job. Well, that's fine. You're the one with a reputation when things go wrong. And I can't tell you how many times a couple of my former employers, I did what they wanted, and one guy screamed at me, "Wait a minute, we got $3,500 into that repair. You're telling me you didn't test drive the transmission?" No. Why would I? You said fix the wiring. I fixed the wiring, got it started, and drove it outside. Well, you should have test driven it. So why would I test drive it if I don't know there's a problem? And I went through stupidity like that for so long that when my back and knee started hurting, I got out of it. Why? Because I was going to start getting angry at people. Give me stupid, absolute narcissistic stupidity. That's not what I told the customer. Don't care. Did you troubleshoot it? No, I knew what was wrong just by listening to him. No, you didn't. I'm going to say in the best possible circumstances, especially in field work that I had the most trouble with, 5%. You might get 5% where you can understand over the phone what the problem was and send somebody out to repair it. To just say, here's your stuff, go fix it. 5%. Seriously. We had one year where it got up to about 25%, but that was because it was obvious. They were putting bad fuel in almost every machine within our region from floodwaters. They were sucking fuel out of old tanks. They let the water settle to the bottom, and they were sucking diesel fuel off the top. They were getting water into it, and the water washed some of the diesel fuel content out of it, the additives. We were having trouble left and right. I mean, filters that were designed to run for 500 hours didn't even make it to 250. We actually reset the monitors on some of them to 150 to 200 hours. And that's when, when they call, you know what that one is. But that's rare. So when they just nod your head. And then start asking questions. Really, what brought that conclusion on? Because there's stuff you'll need to know before you go out in the field. If the customer knows you just came out to look at the project and not repair it, that quite often causes a problem. Why? Because the message didn't come across properly. So, when you can, talk with the customer first. But then again, don't be embarrassed by going out to have a troubleshooting call to know what the problem is so you can call back and order the right parts or make the appropriate adjustments. All right, 21 minutes and change. You folks have a good night.